The sky over Maple Creek, a small American town tucked between rolling hills and two-lane highways, was already bruised with the heavy gray of late afternoon. Thunder threatened in the distance, the kind of storm everyone in town knew by the smell of damp earth before the first raindrop even fell. Inside one weathered clapboard house on Birch Street, the air was thick with the sour scent of liquor and fried onions. A sharp, angry voice cut through the walls like a blade. "Out! I said out!" Carla, her eyes bloodshot and her hair pulled back too tight, shoved the door open with a jarring crack against the frame. In her grip was Emily, a thin girl no older than 8, her ribs showing faintly beneath a faded t-shirt that hung loose like it belonged to someone else. In her small hand, she clutched a bowl of leftover rice. Carla jabbed a finger into her face, her voice slurred but hard. "You're worthless, nothing but a burden. Eating scraps, living off me. Get out of my sight." The bowl slipped from Emily's trembling hands as Carla shoved her forward. Rice scattered like pale confetti across the wooden porch. The child's heel caught on the top step, and she stumbled, scraping her knees against the boards. The sting rose sharp, but she bit her lip, swallowing the cry that wanted to escape. The door slammed behind her once, then again harder. And then came the sound that made Emily's stomach twist tighter than hunger ever could. The cold scrape of the lock sliding shut, metal grinding against metal. Final. She sat frozen for a long moment on the porch, knees tucked up, arms wrapped tight around her small frame. Her stomach growled so loudly it seemed to echo. She pressed her forehead into her arms, the frayed hem of her shirt brushing her face. Inside, all was silent except the faint clatter of dishes and the smell of fried food that seeped through the cracks. Food she would not be allowed to touch. Emily's small fingers hovered over the scattered grains of rice. She picked one up, rolling it between her fingers. Cold. Hard. She didn't eat it. She only held it there, as if even that tiny piece of food could remind her she still existed. The wind rattled the porch railing. Somewhere down the block, a screen door creaked open and shut again. A dog barked once, then fell quiet. Emily's eyes burned, but no tears fell. Crying out loud meant being heard, and being heard meant the whip. She had learned that lesson already, the memory of 100 lashes carved into her back and her mind. The rhythm of the strikes still lived inside her. 1, 2, 3, 10, 50. By the time she reached 100, her body had collapsed on the cold tile floor. Ever since, the simple sound of a lock turning could seize her chest in terror. She pressed her forehead harder to her knees, whispering to herself, "Don't cry. Don't cry out loud." A sparrow burst suddenly from the gutter above, startling her. She lifted her head just enough to glance at the bowl now overturned, a streak of thin soup staining the porch boards. She reached for it carefully, her fingernails scraping against the ceramic as she righted it and pushed it toward the edge, away from where someone might step and break it further. Shadows flickered across the crack at the bottom of the door, the hem of a dress, worn slippers shuffling across the floor. Emily froze, holding her breath, but no voice came. Only the faint scent of medicated ointment mixed with dish soap. She pressed herself back against the porch column, small and silent. The sun broke briefly through the storm clouds, sketching a thin line of gold across the porch steps. Emily stared at the grains of rice sticking stubbornly to the boards. Her stomach growled again, low and long. She licked her lips and nudged another grain onto her fingertip. She didn't swallow it, just held it there, sticky against her skin, as if it could fill the emptiness, clawing at her. Then wide the sound of gravel shifting under a shoe. Emily stiffened, her body tightening like a pulled string. A shadow stretched across the yard and up the porch steps. She didn't look up at first. She only knew someone had stopped at the edge of the yard. He stood there a moment, looking first at the locked door, then at the girl curled up small on the porch. His name was Jack Miller, though Emily didn't know it yet. He was a carpenter, his face weathered by years of sun and work. His sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, his hands darkened with sawdust and pine resin. A heavy tool bag hung from one shoulder. His cheekbones were cut with tired lines, but his eyes, resting now on the trembling child, held no harshness. Jack had lost his wife 3 years earlier during a brutal winter. Since then, he'd been raising his 3 children alone. Sarah, the teenager who tried too hard to be grown, Ben, who never tied his shoes properly, Lucy, the youngest, who still dropped her spoon at dinner with a clang that echoed through their little wooden house. Jack's shoulders carried the fatigue of endless nights, but beneath it lived a quiet resolve, the kind that kept him rising each dawn no matter how heavy the day before had been. That evening, he had taken a shortcut through the narrow lane, heading home to his kids and the half-eaten loaf of bread waiting on the table. He'd heard the slam of a door, the snap of a lock, and then he'd seen her, the girl, small, frail, sitting on the porch with nothing but rice scattered across the boards, and a hunger so loud he could hear it in the silence. Jack didn't step closer right away. He knew the house. He knew the woman inside. He knew the type of silence that carried both the smell of medicated oil and the harsh clang of dishes. He'd heard the gossip at the hardware store, the whispers in the barber's chair. That stepmother hates her, says the girl's cursed since her daddy fell off the scaffolding. Most men in town said it like a joke. Jack had never laughed. He despised how people branded a child with a curse she never asked for. So he stood still, watching from across the street. Not from fear, but because he knew one wrong move could make things worse. The streetlight flickered above. Inside the house came the sound of clinking glasses, Carla's laugh sharp with liquor. No one mentioned the child outside. Emily pulled her knees tighter to her chest, her thin shoulder blades jutting beneath the fabric of her shirt. Her stomach growled again, and the sound pressed against Jack's chest in a way he couldn't ignore. His jaw tightened. His hands shifted on the strap of his tool bag. He knew that if he turned away, he'd never sleep easy again. Still, he didn't move just yet. Emily risked a glance at the figure across the yard. Her eyes met his for a single heartbeat, wide and scared, like a sparrow ready to bolt. She dropped her gaze instantly, pressing her forehead back into her knees. Jack's breath slowed. He thought of Lucy on stormy nights, shivering at the thunder until he dragged the old quilt over them all. He thought of Ben once splitting a stale roll in half, giving the bigger piece to his sister without a word. He thought of Sarah asking him at the corner store, "Dad, if someone's blamed for something they didn't do, what should I do?" And he remembered the only answer he'd been able to give her. First, stand beside her. Now here was this girl, shivering in the chill, shut out by the only family she had left. Jack's boots scraped softly against the gravel as he finally stepped off the curb. He crossed the street, the storm wind pressing against his back. At the bottom of the porch steps, he stopped. Emily's breath caught. She didn't dare lift her head, but she felt his presence like a wall suddenly standing between her and the rest of the world. Jack knelt slowly, his knee pressing against the damp boards with a soft thud. His voice when it came was low and steady, careful not to startle her. "How long have you been out here, kiddo?" Emily didn't answer. Her tangled hair hid half her face and her teeth chattered against her will. Jack glanced up once at the locked door, then back at the girl curled tight against the porch column. His voice gentled even more. "You hungry?" Emily flicked her eyes up in a startled glance, quick as a bird, then dropped them again. Thunder cracked in the distance, closer now. A fat raindrop splashed against the porch railing. Jack shifted his tool bag off his shoulder, the zipper rasping softly as he opened it. And in that small, fragile moment, just before the storm broke, just before the world around them changed, he reached inside, ready to pull out something simple yet life-saving, a piece of bread. The storm broke just as Jack's fingers found the small wax paper bundle in his tool bag. Thunder rattled across the hills and a sudden sheet of rain began to fall, hammering the porch roof in sharp, steady beats. Jack peeled back the crinkling paper, revealing 2 slices of white sandwich bread, the kind he usually saved for his son Ben's late-night snack. He held it out carefully, his palm open, not pushing it too close. "Go on," he said softly. "Just one bite. It'll take the chill off." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes fixed on the bread, then darted toward the locked door, then back down again. Her small hand twitched upward, then froze midair, as if invisible chains were holding it back. Fear had trained her too well. Jack didn't press her. He just kept the bread steady, his voice low, like a father coaxing a spooked animal out of hiding. "You don't have to say anything, just take it. It's yours." Another crack of thunder rolled overhead. The sky opened wider, the rain now slanting in sheets across the porch. Jack shifted slightly, leaning his shoulder so his body shielded the girl from the spray. Emily's hand trembled, inching forward. For the briefest second, her fingertips brushed the edge of the bread. And then, the lock snapped. The front door flew open so hard it slammed against the wall. A harsh yellow light spilled out, and the figure of Carla filled the doorway. Her hair was pulled back tight, a silver bracelet jingling against her wrist. Her eyes, rimmed red from liquor, burned as they zeroed in on the sight before her. Emily crouched on the porch, Jack kneeling with bread in his hand. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the rain. "Don't think I don't see you sniffing around playing savior." Emily jolted upright, panic flashing across her face. She tried to shrink back against the porch post, but Carla's arm shot out like a striking whip. She seized the child's wrist, yanking her up so hard the girl stumbled into Jack's shoulder. "Get up, you useless brat! Always making me look bad!" Carla spat, her words thick with rage. Jack reacted without thought. He rose in one motion, stepping forward, his broad frame blocking Carla's pull. His arm bent at the elbow, wedging between Carla's grip and the girl's fragile wrist. Emily slipped behind him instinctively, clutching the hem of his shirt as if it were a lifeline. Jack's voice came low, steady, each word measured. "You don't treat a child like that." Carla's mouth curled into a mocking laugh, damp with drink. "Oh, spare me your sermons. You don't know what she's like. Nothing but trouble since the day her father fell off that scaffold. Keeping her fed is already more than she deserves." Rain drummed harder, bouncing off the porch rails, splashing across Emily's bare feet. The child pressed closer into Jack's back, her small fingers gripping tighter. Jack inhaled once, slow and deep, holding back the anger burning at the edge of his chest. He'd learned long ago that raising your voice only hardened people like Carla. Instead, he let his words come like the steady turn of a screwdriver. A child needs care, not humiliation, not beatings, not this. Carla's eyes flicked down to the bread packet in the rain, now soggy and half-crushed at Jack's boots. She sneered, her lip curling cruelly. "You think giving her a bite of bread makes you some kind of hero? You don't know the half of it. She breaks dishes, she stares at walls, she brings nothing but bad luck. You want her? Take her. She's a curse." Emily's breath hitched, a faint whimper slipping out before she clamped her mouth shut again. The rain plastered her tangled hair to her cheeks, hiding the bluish mark along her jawline. Jack shifted his weight, his arm subtly angling to keep Carla's hand from reaching past him. "I'm not stepping inside your house," he said, his tone steady, "but I won't stand here and let you hurt her." Carla barked a laugh, loud enough to make the porch light tremble in its socket. "Hurt her? You don't know what hurt is, mister. This is discipline. This is survival. Without me, she'd starve. I should have thrown her out long ago." And as if to punctuate her words, Carla yanked forward again, this time seizing not Emily's wrist but the chain around her neck. A thin cord snapped with a sharp pop. Dangling from Carla's fist was a small, battered military ID tag, the only thing Emily had left of her father. Emily gasped, lunging forward, but Jack's arm barred her path. He caught Carla's wrist mid-swing just as she reared back, ready to fling the tag into the gutter. His hand clamped down, calloused fingers gripping hard enough to stop her cold. "That's enough," Jack said, his voice dropping lower, heavier like an axe splitting wood. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it stretched like a lifetime. The rain poured sideways across the porch, soaking all three of them. Then another sound. Windows creaked open across the street. Curtains twitched. A neighbor's screen door banged once. People were watching now. Carla saw it too. Her lips twisted, her eyes darting nervously toward the gate where shadowy figures were gathering in the rain. She snarled, pushing the child's ragged cloth bag into Jack's chest. Clothes tumbled out, a worn sandal clattering to the step. "There, take her," she spat. "Since you're so high and mighty, take the burden with you." She shoved the bag harder, then whirled back toward the doorway. "And don't come back tomorrow crying about it. She's nothing to me." The door slammed, the lock clicked sharp. For a moment only the rain spoke. Jack stood there, breath steadying, his hand still resting gently on Emily's shoulder. She clutched the tag he had retrieved from Carla's grasp, her fingers curled around it like it was life itself. Jack looked down at her, soaked, shaking, her eyes wide and frightened. And then at the bundle of wet clothes at his feet. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice again. "Does it hurt?" Emily shook her head, though tears streaked across her rain-slicked cheeks. Jack picked up the bag, stuffed the fallen clothes back inside and slung it over his shoulder. Then he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "Come on," he said simply, as if the whole world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "Let's get you out of this rain." Emily hesitated for a beat, glancing once at the locked door behind them. Then she looked up at Jack. For the first time in a long time, she nodded. Together, they stepped down off the porch into the downpour. Across the street, the neighbors who had gathered in silence melted back into their homes. Windows closed, curtains fell back in place, but the whispers had already begun, carried on the storm wind. Jack Miller took in that girl. Carla threw her out. Did you see the way he stood there? Jack ignored it all. His boots sank into the wet gravel as he walked. Emily at his side, clutching his coat and her father's tag. Each step away from that house felt heavier than lumber, but steadier too. Behind them, the porch light flickered once, then went out. The lock that had once slammed her world shut was now abandoned, left behind. Ahead of them, a different door waited. One that opened onto warmth, supper, and 3 children who had no idea their family was about to grow. And for the first time since the scaffolding accident stole her father, Emily felt the smallest flicker of hope. The possibility that she wasn't cursed, wasn't unwanted, wasn't alone. The storm raged on, but beneath Jack's coat, she carried something warmer than bread. A promise. The rain was still pounding hard when Jack finally turned down the narrow gravel lane that led to his house. His boots sank into puddles, and Emily's small sandals slapped against the wet ground, leaving shallow imprints that the storm washed away as quickly as they appeared. Jack shifted the bag of clothes higher onto his shoulder and glanced down at the girl beside him. She clutched his oversized coat so tightly it looked like she might disappear inside of it. In her other hand, she still held the bent ID tag, her knuckles white around the frayed cord. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked as they reached the front steps. Emily didn't answer. Her eyes stayed low, fixed on the glowing light spilling from the window. Inside, the muffled sound of dishes and children's voices carried through the door. Jack paused for just a moment, his hand on the knob, knowing what this meant. For her, for his kids, for all of them. Then he opened the door. Warmth rushed out like a wave. The smell of wood smoke and reheated vegetable soup, the golden light of a single lamp on the kitchen table, the cluttered but lived-in mess of a house where children had just finished homework. 3 faces turned toward the door. Sarah, 13, with her long hair pulled into a quick braid that was already fraying. Ben, 10, his shirt half untucked, a pencil smudge streaking his cheek. Lucy, only 6, clutching a teddy bear nearly as big as she was. For a heartbeat, all 3 froze, wide-eyed at the sight of their father standing there dripping wet, and the thin little stranger wrapped in his coat. Jack closed the door behind them, his voice steady. "This is Emily. She's staying with us tonight." The words fell quiet but sure, like he was announcing a truth, not asking for permission. Ben was the first to move, slipping a screw into his pocket as if embarrassed he'd been caught tinkering under the table. She's staying?" he asked softly. Jack nodded, setting the wet bag down by the door. "It's late, and it's raining." Lucy toddled forward, her teddy dragging on the floor. She squinted up at the girl, and then at the bandage wrapped around Emily's hand. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice lisping just enough to soften the edge of the question. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. She only looked at the little bear held out toward her, old cotton stuffing showing at the seams. Lucy pressed it closer. "You can borrow him if you want." Emily blinked, startled, then glanced at Jack. He gave her the smallest nod, and she reached out hesitantly, taking the teddy in her bandaged hand. The smell of old cotton and Lucy's bubblegum shampoo clung to it. For reasons she couldn't name, the weight in her chest eased just a little. Sarah slipped out from behind the table, pulling out a chair. "Sit here," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look at Jack for answers. She just made space. Emily hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair. Her thin legs barely reached the edge of the seat. She kept her eyes low, her shoulders tense, bracing for the explosion that always came in Carla's house when she dared sit at a table. But no one shouted. Instead, Jack set a reheated bowl of soup in front of her. Steam fogged the rim, carrying the smell of scallions and potatoes. He placed a spoon beside it and said in his calm, gravelly voice, "Go on, eat a few bites to warm up." Emily stared at the bowl, her fingers curled into her lap. Sarah nudged the spoon gently toward her hand. Go ahead, she said quietly, as if speaking to the wind. Ben dropped a chunk of potato into her bowl from his own, awkward but determined. It's better if you eat, he mumbled, not looking directly at her. Lucy propped her chin on her hands and whispered, Eat, her wide eyes watching like it was the most important moment in the world. Emily's throat tightened. She shook her head quickly. I'm full, she whispered, though her stomach growled so loudly the lie collapsed into silence. The air grew heavy with the pause. Jack set his hand flat on the wooden table, his voice cutting through steady and clear. In this house, he said, nobody's a burden. Nobody goes hungry. We're a family. You don't have to be afraid here. The words landed heavy, pressing back every cruel whisper she'd carried. Emily's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, with a trembling hand, she lifted the spoon, dipped it into the bowl, and brought the first mouthful to her lips. Warmth spread instantly down her throat into her chest, loosening the knot inside. The second spoonful came easier. By the third, her hand no longer shook. Across the table, Sarah exhaled softly, as if relieved of a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Ben turned away, pretending not to watch, but his ears burned red. Lucy grinned like she just won a game. Emily ate slowly, quietly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, no one told her she was eating too much. No one snatched the bowl away. No one screamed that she was worthless. When she whispered, "Thank you," the words came out so soft she almost didn't recognize her own voice. Sarah reached for the dented first aid tin, pulling out cotton and fresh bandages. "Let's soak your hand a little," she said. "It'll sting less." Emily obeyed, lowering her small hand into the warm water Jack had set on the table. The sting dulled and her breath steadied. Sarah wrapped the wound neat and snug, her fingers careful. "There," Sarah said. "Tomorrow if it hurts, tell me." Emily nodded faintly, the glow of something fragile lingering in her chest. After supper, Jack pulled a thick blanket from the cupboard. "You'll take the couch tonight," he said. "We'll sort out something better tomorrow." Sarah spread fresh sheets, squaring the corners with practiced precision. Ben brought a clean pillow, tucking it into its case. Lucy solemnly set her teddy at the edge, like a guard on duty. The room quieted. The wall clock ticked past 10. Ben sat cross-legged with his wooden box, whispering without looking up. "Tomorrow I'll finish the secret compartment. You can put your tag in there if you want." Emily clutched the blanket, startled by the plain offer. "Really? Really?" Ben muttered, scratching his neck, his ears reddening again. Sarah dimmed the lamp. "Nobody gets scolded for eating slow here," she said, almost like a promise. The sentence landed in Emily's chest like a stone, blocking a rushing stream. She hugged the blanket tighter, her hands slipping out just enough to clutch her father's tag beneath it. Lucy climbed onto the chair, leaned close and whispered, "If the thunder's too loud, you can hold my hand." Emily managed a faint smile. "Okay." It was the first nod she'd given to another child in this new house. Jack stood at the doorway, towel slung over his shoulder, taking it all in. His 3 children had shifted, each in their own clumsy but perfect way, to make space for one more. "Time for bed," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a full day." The lights went out, leaving only the thin glow of the hallway lamp. The rain outside softened. Emily lay on the couch, pulling the blanket to her chin. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes without waiting for the sound of a lock. Lucy's teddy rested at the edge of her pillow, small but binding, a child's promise kept. And in the quiet hum of a wooden house full of steady breathing, Emily let herself drift toward sleep. By the next morning, the storm had rolled east, leaving behind streets scattered with twigs and puddles that reflected a pale autumn sun. Maple Creek smelled of wet leaves and chimney smoke, a small-town scent that clung to every street. Inside Jack Miller's modest home, the rhythm of a normal day returned quickly. Sarah was braiding Lucy's hair before school, Ben was wrestling with his sneakers by the door, and Jack was pouring coffee into his thermos with the steady movements of a man who had long practiced juggling a family's morning chaos. Emily sat at the edge of the couch, clutching the blanket that still smelled faintly of cedar. She had barely slept, waking at every creak of the house, but no one had shouted at her. No one had locked her in. The simple absence of fear left her in a strange, quiet haze. When Sarah set a piece of toast in front of her, Emily blinked at it as though it were something precious. "Eat fast or Ben will steal it," Sarah teased, brushing crumbs from the counter. Ben groaned. Hey, I don't steal breakfast. You stole my cookie last week, Lucy chirped, pointing a finger. Ben turned red, muttering, that was different. Emily's lips twitched, almost turned into a smile. Jack caught it, a small flicker on her face. His chest eased a little. But outside this warm cocoon, the town had already begun to turn. At Miller's Diner on Main Street, the clink of coffee cups mixed with whispers. You hear about Jack? One man asked, leaning over the counter. Took in that girl from Birch Street, Carla's stepdaughter. The waitress raised her brows. You mean the cursed one? Lord have mercy, why would he bring that into his house? Guess he thinks he's some kind of savior, another said with a chuckle. Mark my words, nothing good comes of it. Girl's been bad luck since her daddy fell. By noon, the rumor had stretched across Maple Creek like spilled ink. At the grocery store, Mrs. Hendricks muttered to another mother in the produce aisle, that poor Miller family, bringing trouble under their roof. Children at school repeated half-heard phrases, and by the time Sarah walked into homeroom, heads had already turned. Your dad picked up a stray? One boy sneered. Sarah's fists clenched under her desk, but she kept her chin high. That afternoon, Emily walked home with Sarah and Ben, Lucy skipping ahead with her backpack bouncing. The sidewalks glistened from rain, and the wind carried crisp hints of winter. They passed two women standing on a porch. The women's voices carried. I heard she's dangerous. Can't blame Carla for trying to be rid of her. Emily's steps faltered. The words slid into her ears like shards of glass. She dropped her gaze to the sidewalk, her hair falling forward like a curtain. Sarah heard too. Her jaw tightened. She glanced down at Emily, who was shrinking smaller with every step. Don't listen to them, Sarah said sharply. But Emily had already heard. She always heard. That Sunday, Pastor John preached in the old Clapper Church on Maple Avenue. The congregation filled the pews, their voices strong in the hymns. Emily sat pressed between Lucy and Sarah, her small hands tucked into her lap. When Pastor John spoke of kindness, of sheltering the broken, Emily dared to lift her head. His eyes swept the room, steady and kind. But she also heard the whispers, low and buzzing, behind her back. Why's she here? Bad omen. She'll bring ruin. The words curled like smoke, impossible to escape. Emily's shoulders hunched, her chest tightening until she could barely breathe. Pastor John paused mid-sermon, his gaze lingering a moment longer on her pew. Then he cleared his throat and said louder, It is easy to blame a child for misfortune. It is cowardly to do so. A child is never a curse. The church fell still. The only sound was the old clock ticking in the back. Emily blinked rapidly, her throat aching. Sarah squeezed her hand. Lucy leaned against her side, and though Emily didn't dare believe it fully, something inside her loosened. That evening, back at the Miller home, Jack found her sitting on the back steps, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the bare trees swaying against the sunset. They're saying things, Gron, she whispered when he stepped outside. About me, about your family, because of me. Jack lowered himself onto the step beside her, groaning softly as his knees bent. He set his thermos down, the faint scent of coffee rising. People will always talk, he said, his voice calm but firm. They talk because it's easier than listening, but I don't give a damn what they say. Her eyes darted up, uncertain. He met them squarely. You're here. That's what matters. My kids like you. Lucy already thinks you're her big sister. Ben's building you that box with the secret drawer. And Sarah, well, she doesn't do that for just anyone. Emily swallowed hard. But what if they're right? What if I'm bad luck? Jack's jaw tightened. He took a breath, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I buried my wife 3 winters ago. People whispered then, too. Said maybe I worked her too hard. Maybe I didn't see she was sick soon enough. They called me cursed behind closed doors. You know what I learned? Emily shook her head. That grief makes folks cruel. They need someone to blame. But blame doesn't fix anything. And curses? He shook his head. Curses only have power if you believe in them. Emily stared at him, her lips parting. Jack reached out, gently brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. You're not cursed, Emily. You're a kid who's been hurt, and that's not the same thing. Her throat tightened. A single tear slipped down, cutting a line through the dirt on her cheek. Jack didn't say more. He just sat beside her, the two of them watching the sun sink over Maple Creek. That night, Emily lay awake on the couch, listening to the steady rhythm of the house. Sarah turning pages upstairs, Ben hammering nails into wood in the shed, Lucy humming to herself as she brushed her doll's hair. For the first time, she realized the whispers outside didn't fill this house. In here, the only sounds were ordinary, comforting, human. And for a fleeting moment before sleep took her, she believed Jack might be right, that curses only lived where you let them. The week after Pastor John's sermon, Maple Creek wore its usual mask of normalcy. Kids rode bikes down Main Street, the grocery shelves stacked high with apples from local orchards. Church bells chimed at noon. But beneath the surface, the town's whispers still carried sharp edges. Carla heard every one of them. She sat in the dim back corner of the Rusty Nail, the only tavern in town worth staying open past midnight. Neon beer signs flickered against the wood-paneled walls, and the jukebox groaned out an old country ballad about love gone wrong. The smell of grease and stale smoke clung to everything. Carla nursed her third whiskey, the glass sweating in her hand. Each sip burned, but not enough to drown the humiliation. Jack Miller had stolen her spotlight, standing in front of half the town, shielding that girl like she was some kind of treasure. And worse, the town had seen Carla shoved back. They'd seen her lose. "Thought I'd find you here." Wade Harper, broad-shouldered and heavy with the smell of motor oil, slid into the seat across from her. He worked odd jobs, none of them steady, and carried a reputation for fists that came quicker than his words. He tipped back her bottle, pouring a sloppy finger of whiskey into his own glass. Carla's lip curled. "Took you long enough." Wade leaned in, his voice low. "You really gonna let Miller make a fool of you? Let that brat sit at his table like she belongs there?" Carla's nails scraped against the rim of her glass. She never belonged anywhere. That child's been nothing but bad luck since her daddy fell off that scaffold. "I told Jack to take her." "Fine. But if he thinks she's safe, he's dead wrong." Wade smirked, teeth yellow under the neon glow. "What are you saying?" Carla lowered her voice even more, her words slurring but sharp. "We take her back, teach her a lesson, remind the town who she really is." Wade chuckled, a sound like gravel. "Jack won't hand her over easy. Man's stubborn as a mule." Carla's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Then we don't ask." At the far end of the tavern, near the payphone, a woman stiffened. Amelia Harper had come in looking for her husband, tired of waiting at home while he spent their grocery money on whiskey. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Wade's voice carried, as it always did when liquor loosened his tongue. Her heart thudded as Carla's words filtered through the smoke. "Take her back. Teach her a lesson." Amelia clutched her worn cardigan tighter, her hands trembling. She'd seen enough in her life to know what lesson meant on Wade's lips. She thought of the girl, thin, wide-eyed, clutching that coat on the Miller porch the night the storm broke. A child who had already suffered more than most adults could bear. Her stomach twisted. She had to tell someone. Later that night, Amelia's shoes slapped against the wet sidewalk as she hurried up the steps of the parsonage beside Maple Creek's church. The porch light flicked on just as she knocked. Pastor John opened the door, his lined face softening with concern. "Amelia, what on earth brings you here this time of night?" She stepped inside, her voice low and shaking. "It's about Carla and Wade. They're planning something. Something about Emily." Pastor John's brows furrowed. He guided her to the worn sofa, listening as she recounted the words she'd overheard. His hand tightened on the armrest, the tendons standing out in his weathered skin. "Lord have mercy," he whispered when she finished. Amelia nodded, tears welling. "They'll hurt that child, Pastor. I know it. And Wade, when he drinks—" She broke off, pressing her sleeve to her mouth. Pastor John leaned forward, his voice firm now. "You did right coming here. Emily's not alone. We'll make sure of that." Meanwhile, back at the Miller home, Emily was curled up on the couch beneath the quilt Sarah had tucked around her. Lucy had fallen asleep with her small hand draped over Emily's wrist, as if to anchor her to this new life. Jack stood in the doorway watching them. The flickering lamplight caught the silver tag Emily clutched tight against her chest. He thought about the whispers he'd heard in town, the stares at the diner, the half-hidden sneers at the hardware store. He knew the storm wasn't over. It was just gathering strength. Jack exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. "They'll have to go through me first," he muttered under his breath. Back at the tavern, Carla ordered another round, her voice rising over the jukebox. Wade leaned back in his chair, grinning with the confidence of a man too drunk to see tomorrow. But in the quiet corners of Maple Creek, word was already moving faster than they realized. Amelia's confession would not stay hidden. By morning, Pastor John would have spoken with Sheriff Briggs. By the end of the week, the whole town would know. For now, though, Carla tipped her glass high, the ice clinking against the rim. To bad luck, she sneered, and making sure Jack Miller regrets ever crossing me. Wade laughed, a sound that rattled through the smoky tavern. Neither noticed the figure slipping out the side door, coat pulled tight, carrying a burden heavier than fear. The truth of their plot, now ready to be unleashed. At sunrise, Maple Creek woke to the sound of church bells. Crows lifted from the fields and the diner clattered to life. On Birch Street, Carla's porch light flickered in the gray dawn. At the Miller home, Jack brewed coffee as his kids stirred awake. Emily still wrapped in the quilt, unaware of the danger brewing. But in Pastor John's study, Amelia sat with red-rimmed eyes as the sheriff listened carefully, jotting notes. "You're sure about this?" Sheriff Briggs asked. "I'd stake my life on it," Amelia whispered. Briggs closed his notebook with a snap. "Then we'll be ready. If Carla and Wade want trouble, they'll find the whole town waiting." Amelia's hands shook, but for the first time in years, she felt lighter. She had spoken. She had done something. And somewhere across town, Emily stirred in her sleep, clutching the tag in her hand, unaware that forces of cruelty and forces of protection were now colliding around her. The storm was coming again, and this time it would not be fought in shadows. The night after Amelia confessed what she'd overheard at the tavern, Jack Miller's house settled into its usual rhythm. The kids had gone to bed early, Lucy curled up with her bear, Ben tinkering with his wooden box until sleep finally took him, Sarah reading by flashlight under her quilt. Emily lay on the couch, still clutching Jack's coat, even though the house was warm. For a brief, fragile stretch of hours, everything was still. Then came the pounding. 3 sharp fists against the front door. Emily's eyes flew open. Her chest seized, breath caught halfway in her throat. The sound was too familiar. The sound that always meant trouble. Jack was already out of his chair, crossing the living room in 3 long strides. He motioned Emily back with one hand before yanking the door open. On the porch stood Carla, soaked to the skin, her hair plastered against her cheeks. Her lipstick was smeared, her eyes wild, and the bottle on the step beside her said she hadn't sobered since the tavern. "You think you can steal from me?" she spat, her voice raw from whiskey and rage. "You think you can parade around town like some kind of saint while you've got what's mine?" Jack held the doorframe steady with one hand, his voice low. "Emily's not yours to steal. She's a child. She deserves better than what you gave her." Carla laughed, a jagged, broken sound that made Emily flinch from the couch. "Better? You think you're better than me, Miller? I fed her. I clothed her. And how does she repay me? With curses and trouble." Her eyes darted past him, landing on Emily. "Get out here, girl!" Emily shrank deeper into the couch cushions, trembling. Her small fingers tightened around the dog tag until the edges dug into her skin. Jack shifted, broad shoulders filling the doorway. "You're not dragging her anywhere." Carla stepped forward, pointing a sharp painted nail into his chest. "You can't keep her from me. I'll come back tomorrow with the sheriff, with papers, with whatever it takes. She's mine, and I'll tear this house apart if I have to." The last words rang through the night air, loud enough to wake the kids upstairs. Sarah appeared on the stairs, Ben behind her, Lucy rubbing her eyes. Jack saw their frightened faces and felt anger surge hot in his chest. He stepped forward, forcing Carla back onto the porch. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying like a hammer strike. "You will not come here drunk, screaming at my children, threatening them. Not tonight. Not ever again." Carla's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll drag that brat out myself in front of the whole town." A flashlight beam cut across the yard then, slicing through the dark. "Carla?" Pastor John stood at the gate, his coat buttoned against the chill, his face stern. Behind him strode Sheriff Briggs, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his holstered weapon. "We heard enough," the sheriff said, his voice calm but heavy. "Go home, Carla. Sleep it off before you end up in the cell." Carla whipped around, her mouth opening to fire back, but the sight of the sheriff's steady gaze sobered her faster than the liquor. She bent, snatched up her bottle, and stumbled down the steps. "You'll all see," she snarled over her shoulder. "She's nothing but bad luck. And when trouble comes, don't say I didn't warn you." Her shadow swayed down the street until it disappeared into the night. Jack exhaled slowly, shoulders still tense. He turned back to the living room, where Emily sat frozen, eyes huge, face pale. Lucy had crept down the stairs and now slipped past Jack to climb onto the couch beside her. Without a word, she curled against Emily's side, her small hand sliding into Emily's. Emily blinked, startled, then clutched her back. Pastor John stepped onto the porch, his eyes sweeping over the children gathered in the hallway. "This can't go on in the shadows anymore," he said quietly. "The town has to face it. We'll call a meeting. Everyone will hear the truth, and no one will be able to pretend they didn't." Jack nodded once, the decision heavy but right. Sheriff Briggs tipped his hat. "I'll see to it. Sunday night at the church. Carla and Wade won't have the last word." The next days passed with a strange mixture of fear and resolve. Emily tried to help around the house, folding blankets, sweeping the porch, anything to feel less like an intruder. But every time she heard footsteps outside, her body tensed, ready for the door to burst open. Ben showed her the nearly finished wooden box, the hidden drawer smoothed with sandpaper. "You can put your tag in here," he said. "Nobody will take it from you now." Emily traced the grain of the wood with her fingertip, her throat thick with words she couldn't form. Sarah helped her wash her clothes, showing her how to scrub and wring them out. "You'll need strong arms," Sarah said, flexing her own with a grin. For the first time, Emily giggled. Small, fleeting, but real. Lucy never left her side. "You'll sit by me at church, right?" she asked each night before bed. Emily always nodded. And through it all, Jack worked long hours in his shop, but every evening he came home and checked the locks twice, making sure the children saw. "You're safe here," he'd say, his voice steady as a nailed beam. Sunday arrived crisp and cold. The bell of the white-painted church tolled at dusk, echoing across Maple Creek. One by one, families filed in, their boots tracking mud across the wooden floorboards. The pews filled quickly, the air heavy with tension. Whispers darted through the crowd like sparks before a fire. Emily sat wedged between Lucy and Sarah, Jack's broad shoulder solid at her side. Her heart pounded as she saw Carla slip in, Wade lumbering behind her, both wearing smug defiance. Pastor John stood at the pulpit, his hands gripping the edges. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice steady but carrying to every corner. "Tonight we face what has too long been ignored. We speak not of curses, but of truth, and truth will not stay silent any longer." Emily lowered her gaze to the wooden floor, her hand clutching Lucy's. The whispers swelled around her, sharp and cutting. But for the first time, she wasn't alone in facing them. Jack's voice cut low into her ear, steady as a promise. "We've got you." Emily swallowed hard, bracing herself. The storm that had haunted her life was about to break in front of the entire town. The old church on Maple Avenue had never felt so crowded. The wooden pews groaned under the weight of nearly every family in Maple Creek, from the grocer to the school teacher to the farmers who drove in from the outskirts. The air was thick with heat despite the chill outside, and the smell of damp coats mixed with wood polish and old hymnals. Emily sat stiff between Sarah and Lucy, her knees pressed together, her hands clutching the dog tag under her dress like a secret anchor. The murmur of voices surrounded her, whispers sharp with judgment, speculation, fear. "Why are we here?" someone muttered. "Carla's girl. Trouble's been brewing. She shouldn't be out in public." Every word made Emily shrink smaller, wishing she could fold herself invisible. But Lucy's small hand stayed on hers, warm and steady. At the front, Pastor John stood tall behind the pulpit. He didn't raise his hands for silence. He simply waited. Slowly the room quieted, one voice after another falling into uneasy stillness. "We are gathered tonight," he said, his voice resonant, "because truth must not remain in the shadows. Too long this child has borne the weight of lies, cruelty, and superstition. Tonight, Maple Creek will face what it has allowed to fester." A ripple went through the pews. Carla shifted where she sat with Wade, arms crossed, her eyes flashing defiance. Pastor John turned slightly, nodding to the first speaker. "Jack Miller." Jack rose from the front row. His presence was calm but commanding. A man who had worked with his hands all his life, who built tables and homes, and would now build this case of truth in front of his neighbors. He walked to the pulpit, setting his calloused hands against the wood. "2 weeks ago," he began, voice steady, "I saw something no man in good conscience could ignore. I saw Emily locked out of her home, in the rain, hungry. I saw Carla shove her, call her worthless. I saw the bruises. I saw the fear." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A woman in the back shook her head, whispering, "Lord help us." Jack's gaze swept the room. I opened my door to her that night. Since then, my children have done what comes natural. They've made room at our table. And in those days, I've seen no curse, no bad luck. I've only seen a child who needed kindness. His words landed like hammer strikes. He stepped back, and Pastor John nodded solemnly. Thank you, Jack. Now Amelia Harper. All eyes turned as Amelia stood from the middle pew, her hands trembling as she clutched her cardigan tight around her. Wade shifted beside Carla, his face darkening, but Amelia didn't look at him. She walked to the front, each step heavy with resolve. Her voice shook at first. I didn't mean to overhear, but I was at the Rusty Nail last week, and I heard Carla and my husband talking. She swallowed, forcing the words out. They said they were going to take Emily back, teach her a lesson. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Amelia's eyes welled. I know what Wade means when he says lesson. I've lived with his fists, and I could not stay silent knowing that child might face the same. For a long moment, the church was silent except for Amelia's shaky breath. Carla shot to her feet, her voice shrill. Lies, she's bitter. She wants to shame me because she can't keep her man under control. But Sheriff Briggs from standing at the side aisle raised a hand. Sit down, Carla. You'll have your turn. Carla froze, fuming, but dropped back onto the pew. Pastor John placed a hand gently on Amelia's shoulder. Thank you for your courage. Then he turned back to the room. But there is one voice we have not yet heard. The most important one. Emily. The air grew taut, every gaze swinging toward her. Emily's chest tightened. Her legs felt nailed to the pew. Sarah squeezed her arm. Lucy whispered, You can do it. Jack bent slightly, his voice a quiet rumble. Only if you want to, kiddo. Emily swallowed hard. Her body screamed to stay silent, to curl smaller. But deep inside, something stirred. The memory of Jack's words on the back steps. Curses only have power if you believe in them. She rose slowly, her knees wobbling. The walk to the front felt longer than any road she'd ever traveled. The stairs burned, but she fixed her eyes on the wooden pulpit, tracing its grain with her gaze until she reached it. Her hands shook as she clutched the edge. Her voice when it came was a whisper. I never asked to be bad luck. The words seemed to echo in the silence. She swallowed louder this time. I never asked to be hit or locked out or called names. I only ever wanted to eat at a table, to sleep in a bed without being afraid, to be loved. Her voice cracked on the last word. Tears blurred her vision, but she pressed on. I'm not a curse. I'm just a kid. I just want a home. The church held its breath. Some faces softened, others turned away in shame. Lucy sniffled in the front pew, clutching her bear tight. Sarah blinked fast, proud tears shining. Ben sat straighter, his fists clenched in fierce loyalty. Emily swiped her sleeve across her face and stepped back, her chest heaving. She had said it. She had put her truth into the air where no lock could silence it again. Pastor John's voice filled the space, resonant and clear. You've heard her. You've heard Jack. You've heard Amelia. Now ask yourselves, will Maple Creek be the kind of town that punishes a child for surviving, or the kind that stands for justice? A low murmur spread, this time different, not sharp whispers, but thoughtful, shifting voices. Heads nodded. Some eyes glistened. Carla rose again, sputtering. You fools, she'll ruin you all. You'll see. But her voice no longer carried the room. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward. That's enough. Carla, Wade, I'll have words with you after. For now, sit down and keep quiet. The authority in his tone silenced them at last. Emily slipped back to the pew, her legs shaking, but Lucy and Sarah immediately wrapped her in their arms. For the first time in her memory, she didn't feel small when all eyes were on her. She felt seen. And in the hush of that old church, something shifted. A community that had clung to superstition now faced a choice, and many hearts were already turning. For a long breath after Emily's trembling words, the church seemed frozen in stillness. The old rafters creaked, the wind rattled faintly against the stained glass windows, but inside no one moved. Then Carla shot to her feet. You people are blind, she shouted, her voice ragged. Her fists trembled at her sides and the pew groaned under the sudden motion. She's poisoned my life since the day she came into it. Everything that's gone wrong. My husband's fall, the bills, the whispers in this town. It's all because of her. Her words cracked like a whip, slicing through the congregation. Some flinched, others frowned, but no one spoke. Emily's stomach knotted. She pressed closer to Sarah, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Carla pointed a shaking finger toward the front pew. And you, Jack Miller, you think you're noble? Bringing her into your house? She'll drag you down like she dragged me down. You'll regret it, mark my words. Jack rose slowly, his jaw tight. But before he could speak, Wade Harper lumbered to his feet beside her. His face was red, his bulk filling the aisle. She's right, he growled. This town's soft, always bending for the weak. That girl's nothing but bad luck, and you'll all pay for coddling her. The crowd stirred, gasps and murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. His voice cut sharp through the noise. That's enough, Wade. But Carla wasn't finished. She shoved past the pew, stumbling into the aisle, her hair flying loose. No, you can't make me shut up. I've carried this curse for years, and I won't let her spread it to the rest of you. She belongs in the gutter, not in a church. Emily flinched, her small body folding in on itself. But Jack's hand landed steady on her shoulder, firm and protective. Pastor John slammed his palm against the pulpit. Carla! His voice boomed louder than anyone had ever heard it. This is the house of God, and you will not spew hatred here. Carla froze, her chest heaving, eyes darting wildly across the congregation. But Wade sneered, puffing out his chest. She's just saying what everyone else is thinking. You can't cage the truth. Sheriff Briggs stepped closer, his voice low but iron strong. Truth? Truth is a child left out in the rain. Truth is bruises and hunger. Truth is a town tired of watching cruelty wear a mask. You've crossed the line. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt, the metallic click echoing through the sanctuary. Carla Harper, Wade Harper, you're under arrest for child endangerment, conspiracy to harm a minor, and disturbing the peace. The church erupted in a storm of voices, gasps, whispers, even a few shouts. Carla's eyes widened. You wouldn't dare. But Briggs was already at her side. He caught her wrist with steady hands, snapping the cold steel around it before she could pull away. She twisted, shrieking, but his grip was unyielding. Wade lunged forward, his arms swinging, but Jack was faster. Years of carpentry had hardened his reflexes, and he stepped in, blocking Wade's path, pushing him back with the weight of a man who had nothing left to fear. Briggs's deputy, who had been waiting by the back door, rushed forward, grabbing Wade's other arm. The two men wrestled briefly, the benches shaking under the struggle until the cuffs clicked shut. Wade's curses rattled the air, but the fight drained from him as he realized the whole town was watching. Children clung to their parents. Women pressed hands to their mouths. Men shook their heads, shame in their eyes. Carla, writhing against the cuffs, screamed toward Emily. You'll never be free of me, you hear? Never. You'll carry this curse till the day you die. Emily's tears blurred her vision, but something inside her hardened. She rose from the pew, her small figure trembling but upright. Her voice quavered, but it carried. No, she said, I'm not cursed. I'm not yours anymore. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling, reverberating through the silence that followed. Carla froze, her mouth open. For the first time, she seemed to falter. The sheriff tugged her toward the aisle. You'll answer to the court now, not to this child. As Carla and Wade were marched down the aisle, the chains clinking with each step, the congregation parted in silence. No one reached out. No one defended them. Only the echo of Emily's words remained. Afterward, the church filled with uneasy chatter. Some still shook their heads, others whispered apologies under their breath. But many came forward to Jack, placing hands on his shoulder, murmuring gratitude. Emily stayed pressed against Sarah, Lucy's little arms around her waist. For the first time, she felt something she had never dared believe possible in public. People looking at her not with scorn, but with pity, and maybe even respect. Pastor John closed the meeting with a prayer for healing, his voice steady, asking for strength not just for Emily, but for a town that had failed her too long. When it was done, the pews emptied slowly into the night. Outside, the stars spread wide across the cold sky. Emily tilted her head back, her breath misting, and for once she didn't fear the darkness. She saw only space, wide, endless, waiting to be filled with something new. Jack crouched beside her, his voice low. You were brave tonight, braver than anyone had a right to ask you to be. Emily clutched the dog tag tight in her fist. She can't hurt me anymore, can she? Jack shook his head. Not anymore. Not ever again. Sarah stepped forward, placing her arm around Emily's shoulders. Ben slipped the wooden box into her hands at last. Finished, polished smooth. Lucy grinned up at her, eyes wide and proud. Emily looked at them. This family who had claimed her, shielded her, believed in her. The weight of chains she had carried for so long seemed to lift, piece by piece, until only the faint echo remained. She opened the box, laid her father's tag inside the secret compartment, and closed it with a click. Not an ending, but the start of something safe. As they walked home together under the quiet sky, Emily's steps felt different. Not the shuffling of a child shrinking away, but the steady tread of someone learning, finally, what it meant to belong. The morning after Carla and Wade were let out of the church in handcuffs, Maple Creek felt strangely quiet. The streets that usually hummed with gossip seemed muted, as if the whole town was holding its breath. A few people nodded to Jack at the hardware store. Others avoided his eyes. But one truth had settled into everyone's mind. The girl they had called Cursed was no longer hidden in the shadows. Back at the Miller house, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Sarah, Ben, and Lucy. The smell of bacon and biscuits filled the room, sunlight spilling through the window onto the cluttered counter. Jack moved easily around the stove, his worn flannel sleeves rolled up, flipping eggs with the same precision he used in his carpentry. Emily watched the scene as though she had stumbled into someone else's dream. For so long, mealtimes had meant shouting, slaps, and the scrape of plates ripped away too soon. Now there was only the clatter of forks, the chatter of children, and Jack's calm voice reminding Ben to wash his hands before eating. "Pass the jelly," Ben muttered, already reaching across the table. Sarah smacked his hand lightly. "Ask nicely." Ben rolled his eyes but tried again. "Please pass the jelly." Lucy giggled, handing it over like it was some royal offering. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. She lowered her gaze quickly, afraid someone might see. But Sarah had already noticed. "You can laugh," Sarah said softly. "It's allowed here." Emily's cheeks warmed. She dipped her biscuit into the eggs, taking a careful bite. No one snatched it away. No one scolded her for eating slow. Jack set his own plate down at the head of the table and looked around at the 4 children gathered. "Now this," he said, a rare smile tugging his mouth, "looks like a family." Emily's throat tightened at the word. Family. The days that followed grew into something Emily had never known. Routine. She and Sarah walked to school together, Sarah making sure Emily didn't fall behind when whispers followed in the hallway. At first, other children stared. Some muttered cruel things under their breath. But Sarah's steady glare and Ben's sharp tongue made most of them quiet down. At recess, Lucy grabbed Emily's hand proudly. "This is my sister," she announced to anyone who would listen. The word sister made Emily's chest ache, but in a way that felt less like pain and more like hope. At night, Jack tucked the younger kids in and checked the locks twice. Emily learned the sound of safety, the click of the deadbolt, the sigh of the wind outside, the hum of a house that didn't hold secrets. One evening, Sarah pulled Emily to the shed where Ben had been working. The wooden box was finished at last, sanded smooth, the secret drawer sliding easily with a tug. Emily ran her hand over the grain, the smell of pine sharp in the air. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ben shrugged, ears turning red. "It's just wood." "No," Emily said firmly, clutching her father's dog tag and placing it inside the hidden compartment. "It's safe." The siblings exchanged a glance, then left her alone for a moment. Emily stood there, her small hand resting on the lid, breathing in the feeling of something finally hers. The town, meanwhile, shifted slowly. At the diner, the same men who once muttered about curses now lowered their voices when Emily's name was mentioned. Some still shook their heads, unwilling to change, but others began to soften. Mrs. Hendricks, the grocer's wife, pressed an apple into Emily's hand one afternoon without charging. "For you," she said simply. At church the next Sunday, Pastor John spoke of forgiveness and courage, his eyes lingering warmly on the pew where Emily sat with the Millers. A few townsfolk nodded at her afterward, not quite smiling, but not sneering either. It was a start, but not all had changed. On the walk home, Emily overheard one woman whisper, "That girl will bring storms yet." The words lodged in her chest like thorns. That night, she sat on the back steps again, staring at the dark fields. Jack joined her, lowering himself onto the step with a grunt. "They'll always talk," he said quietly, "but words can't chain you unless you let them." Emily hugged her knees, whispering, Sometimes I still feel like she's right, like I'll ruin everything. Jack looked at her, his gaze steady. Emily, listen to me. You didn't ruin anything. You survived. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Her throat tightened, tears threatening. And you know what? He added. You belong here, at my table in this family. Don't let anyone tell you different. Emily blinked, a tear slipping free. She didn't wipe it away. One evening, as autumn deepened, Sarah suggested they draw together at the kitchen table. She handed Emily a box of colored pencils, the tips worn from years of school projects. Emily hesitated, then began to sketch. Her lines were shaky at first, but soon shapes emerged. A small wooden house, a tree with wide branches, a door standing open. She colored the sky a soft gold, shading in rays of light. Lucy leaned over her shoulder, gasping. That's our house! Ben squinted. And that's the big oak out back. Emily nodded, whispering, It's where I want to be. Sarah smiled softly. Looks like home to me. Jack, watching from the doorway, felt his throat tighten. He hadn't seen Emily's face so unguarded before. Eyes focused, lips curved, shoulders no longer hunched. It was the face of a child beginning to believe in tomorrow. By late November, the town's leaves had turned brittle and brown, crunching underfoot. Thanksgiving approached, and Jack's modest house filled with the smell of pumpkin pie and roasted chicken. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. When they gathered at the table that night, Sarah insisted Emily say grace. Emily froze, eyes darting. But then Lucy squeezed her hand and whispered, You can. Emily closed her eyes, her voice trembling but clear. Thank you for food, for warmth, for people who don't yell, for family. When she opened her eyes, the room was silent, all three Miller children looking at her with soft smiles. Jack bowed his head once, quiet pride in his eyes. For Emily, it was the first real prayer she had ever believed in. That night, lying beneath the quilt on the couch, Emily clutched the wooden box to her chest. Inside, the dog tag rested safe, no longer a lonely relic, but a piece of something bigger, a legacy she carried into a family that had claimed her. The whispers in town might not vanish overnight. The scars of her past might never fade completely. But as she drifted to sleep with the sounds of laughter still echoing upstairs, Emily knew this much. She was no longer a shadow. She was a daughter, a sister, a child with a place at the table. And for the first time in her memory, she dreamed not of locked doors, but of open ones. Winter settled over Maple Creek with a quiet insistence. Snow dusted the rooftops, kids dragged sleds through side streets, and smoke curled steadily from chimneys. The world looked softer under white, as though the town itself had pulled on a quilt. At the Miller home, life carried a rhythm Emily had never dared dream of. Each morning, the house filled with the clatter of spoons, Ben's grumbling about chores, Sarah's steadying reminders, Lucy's giggles echoing down the hallway. And at the table, always, there was a seat for her. That seat became more than a chair. It was a place of belonging, a place where no one called her cursed, no one ripped food away, no one told her she was less than human. On a quiet Saturday, Jack stood in the kitchen, repairing a wobbly chair leg, while the children huddled around the table with paper and pencils. Emily's drawing had spread across half the page now. Not just the Miller house and the white oak tree, but details, the porch steps, Lucy's teddy left on the rail, Ben's half-built birdhouse, Sarah's braids swinging as she raked leaves. And at the center, always, the door stood open. Jack leaned against the counter, watching. His heart swelled in ways he hadn't felt since before grief hollowed him out. Emily, once curled in fear on a cold porch, was now bent in concentration, coloring the world she was finally allowed to imagine. The town, too, began to change. It was slow. Change always was, but undeniable. At the diner where once her name had been whispered like a curse, the waitress now poured Emily a glass of milk without charge. At school, a boy who had once teased her now offered half a sandwich at lunch. At church, a family who had turned their backs weeks earlier invited her to join their daughter for a play date. Not everyone softened, of course, some muttered still, but the balance had shifted. Pastor John reminded the congregation often, "We are measured not by how we treat the strong, but how we treat the smallest among us." Sheriff Briggs kept his word too. Carla and Wade were no longer a threat. Justice had been served in court, their names now tied to shame rather than authority. For Emily, knowing they were gone was like waking from a nightmare she had been trapped in for years. One evening near Christmas, the Millers gathered around the table again. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, the tree in the corner glowing with mismatched ornaments. Jack cleared his throat, lifting his mug of cocoa. "This year," he said, voice rough but steady, "I'm thankful for one more voice at this table." He glanced at Emily. "You've brought light into this house, kiddo. More than you know." Emily's cheeks burned, but she smiled, small and real. Lucy clapped her hands. Ben muttered, "About time someone else takes Dad's side in arguments." Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled too. Emily pressed her palm against the wooden box Ben had built, resting on the table beside her. Inside lay her father's dog tag, not hidden now but kept safe, surrounded by love, not locked away by fear. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe without waiting for the snap of a lock or the sting of a lash. On New Year's Eve, snow fell thick across the yard. Emily bundled into Jack's coat, standing with Lucy at the window as fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. "Make a wish," Lucy whispered. Emily thought of the girl she once was, sitting on a porch in the rain, clutching scattered grains of rice like they were enough to keep her alive. She thought of Carla's voice, sharp and cruel, branding her a curse. And then she thought of Jack's steady hand, Sarah's quiet strength, Ben's awkward kindness, Lucy's open arms. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I wish this door never closes." When she opened them again, Jack was watching from across the room, and he gave her the smallest nod, as if he'd heard her. Spring eventually returned. The snow melted into soft ground, and green shoots pushed up stubbornly from the earth. Emily drew again, this time a picture of herself standing outside the Miller house, the door wide open, sunlight spilling across the porch. She added the oak tree, taller now, and 4 figures beside her, their hands linked with hers. When she showed Jack, his eyes glistened. He didn't say much, just hung the drawing on the kitchen wall with a magnet. It stayed there, a daily reminder that some stories didn't end with storms, but with the promise of tomorrow. One afternoon, Emily sat on the porch steps with Sarah, Ben, and Lucy, watching the sun sink gold over Maple Creek. The town had grown quieter in its whispers, busier in its kindness. For once, Emily felt the weight of eyes, not as chains, but as gentle acknowledgement. Lucy leaned against her, asking, "You happy now?" Emily thought for a moment. Then she nodded. "Yes, I think I am." Ben nudged her shoulder, muttering, "Told you, you fit here." Sarah smiled softly. "You always did." And Jack, standing at the porch rail, looked out over his children, all 4 of them now, and let himself believe that sometimes broken families could make each other whole. That night, Emily added one last detail to her drawing on the wall. A sun breaking fully through the clouds, its rays reaching every corner of the page. She stepped back, smiling faintly. For the first time in her life, the picture in front of her didn't feel like a wish. It felt like the truth. And the truth was this: she wasn't cursed. She wasn't alone. She had a home, a family, and an open door that would never close.